Yo, what's going on, Kicks Army? Happy late Thanksgiving to anyone who celebrated it. This is going to be a sneaker drawing of the Nike Kobe 5 Bruce Lee. Rest in peace, Kobe. I will also be talking about details for the upcoming coloring book I plan on releasing, which will be the Hypebeast coloring book. And speaking of coloring books, I will actually have both of my Nike and Jordan coloring books available on sale for 25% off during this Black Friday weekend. And probably onto Cyber Monday as well, just to round out the month. The link to that will be in the description along with the stencil for this video. Now with all that being said, let's get it! So earlier this month, I began production working on my next coloring book, which would be the Hypebeast coloring book. I plan on having this book completed by the end of the year, and that would make it my third coloring book done this year, the first one being the Jordan coloring book that I released in June. Which for me essentially means that it takes about 2 months to complete a book. I haven't yet tracked the number of hours specifically that I put into each book, but I know they each took at least 100 hours. Because you gotta figure, even with the Jordan coloring book that has less stencils in the book compared to the Nike coloring book, which has I think 10 more, the Jordan coloring book has 46 sneakers in it, and each sneaker takes at least an hour to an hour and a half to draw. And then it's an additional hour in Photoshop, sometimes 2 or 3 hours if the sneaker is really complex like the Air Jordan 20, which means that each sneaker in my book requires about 2.5 to 3 hours of work. And the reason for why I do it this way as opposed to creating vector files from Illustrator is because with my style that I currently have, it has a slight organic feel to it because it was originally done by hand. And it's very possible that this is all entirely just subjective and that it ultimately doesn't matter and I can spend half as much time making these books and they would still sell just as well. But for one, I feel like that would be cutting corners on y'all, the consumers, which definitely isn't cool. And two, if this is going to be a completed, published product that's going to be out there to sell forever in perpetuity, I want this to be something that I'm proud of and something that I really push myself to accomplish. Because otherwise, then why do it in the first place? Why spend all this time, build all this brand, do all this stuff for free if I'm not going to commit to when I actually make a product? And for whatever it's worth, me pushing myself to continue to be better is much better for you guys, the consumers. Let me explain. Back when I was working on my initial coloring book, the Air Jordan coloring book in June, I actually had a number of the sneakers that I wanted to put in the book already completed from the years of doing free stencils on my website, KicksArt.com. And naturally, that makes sense. I mean, the first 2 videos on this channel were me doing the Air Jordan 3 and the Air Jordan 6. Even though I didn't have my own website at the time, I uploaded them to Flickr, which is like a service that Yahoo owns, and then when I eventually got my own website, I just transported those images to my site. And that was 6 years ago, so over time I definitely leveled up in not just my skills as an artist, but my style and how I choose to refine it whenever I do sneakers specifically. And don't get me wrong, as free sneaker coloring pages, they're great, but if they're gonna go in something that I consider to be a product that I'm going to sell, they did not meet the metaphorical bar that I had set for the standards of my sneakers, which meant that I pretty much had to redo every sneaker in that book as well as add all of the lows that I didn't already have on the website prior, which also meant that all of those stencils were updated on the website plus adding a whole bunch of new ones, which is a total win-win-win because I get to level up my skills, I get to improve a lot of those old stencils that I had made before, you the consumer that uses the free stencils get better versions of those old stencils, and then you the ones who like the book get a better version of the book as opposed to what the book would have been. See, all this stuff is fascinating to me, I love it. So now let's fast forward to middle November, about a week ago. I'm already 2 coloring books in, I have the Nike and the Jordan coloring book, and I'm thinking, okay, I have about a month and a half until the end of this year comes. And I was looking through my future list of coloring books that I plan on doing, so on here I currently have the Air Max coloring book, Adidas, which will ultimately be like 40% Yeezys, and then we have high fashion, and finally Off-White. And ultimately, I was thinking about going with the high fashion one as I feel like it has a lot of different models as well as brands that are not traditional to what the normal sneakerhead knows of. And it would also fit as a good contrast to the other 2 existing coloring books that I currently offer. But then absolute brilliance struck. Brilliance, I tell you. No, but I was thinking about the word Hypebeast one day and I'm like, you know what? Like, what about that as a coloring book? Because Hypebeasts tend to like a lot of premium collaboration, exclusive, chunky type shoes. So why not make a book about that? Because there would give me the freedom and flexibility to include some of those Hypebeast type premium brands, such as the Balenciagas, the Gucci's, the Louis Vuittons, you know, the high fashion stuff, as well as some of these other models from these popular brands like Nike and Adidas. It's the perfect theme that allows allows me to get away with this particular assortment of sneakers in ways that other themes necessarily wouldn't. Now, to be fair, about half of the sneakers I have selected so far are Nike brand, so it is a little heavy on the Nike side, but again, when we're talking about Hypebeasts, there's a good reason why I chose a lot of those sneakers. Remember about how I was mentioning earlier that creating these coloring books requires me to update a lot of these older stencils, as well as create new ones that maybe I didn't feel like I wanted to make in the past, such as that Air Jordan 20 with all that detail on the upper strap. Well, this book is going to do that same exact thing, except it's going to push it a little bit further. So for example, when we're talking about foam posits, for this upcoming book, I'm going to include the Supreme and the Paranorman foam posit. And unless either of those two were requested by one of my Patreon supporters, link to that is also down in the description below. I probably wouldn't have made that because they're kind of difficult to make. And don't get me wrong, they're still going to be a little difficult. They're not impossible, but they're certainly not easy to do. But the book as a whole is not an easy thing to do. So what's one little piece that's not easy compared to an entire project that's not easy? And the more difficult of a project as I can make this, the better of an outcome the product will be. Now, I have already began production working on the book. I am still finalizing the final list. I have to make a few tweaks here and there for models that I think should be included / should be taken out. But I expect two things to come out from this. One, for this to be done by the end of the year, and two, for this to be the best book out of the three. Which, by the way, if you were interested in copying one of the other two books, I am running a Black Friday sale that's going to run until the end of this month for 25% off each book. But that's going to do it for today's video. I will go over my selection, the specific reasoning for my selection in next week's video. Stay safe, wash your hands, be nice to others, and I will see you guys in the next video. Yeet!